The rain hammered the rooftops of Chevy Chase like a relentless drumline, turning the winding lanes of Somerset Terrace into black mirrors that reflected every street lamp in fractured shards. At 11:47 p.m. on a mid-October Tuesday, Vanessa Carmichael guided her 2024 BMW X5 through the final curve toward home, the wipers sweeping in tired arcs across the windshield. 42 years old and bone-deep exhausted, she had spent the last 14 hours locked inside windowless conference rooms at the Department of Justice, hammering out the final language of a consent decree that would reshape an entire East Coast Police Department. Constitutional statutes, pattern or practice findings, and the quiet weight of federal authority still cluttered her mind. All she wanted was the hot shower, the single glass of Cabernet, and the silence of her own bed. She tapped the left turn signal and eased onto the tree-lined street of sprawling stone colonials and manicured lawns where houses routinely cleared $3 million. 2 years earlier, she had bought the house at 402 Somerset Terrace after decades of Harvard law, relentless litigation, and the kind of institutional climb that left little room for softness. It was supposed to be sanctuary. Sanctuaries, she knew better than most, were often just carefully maintained illusions. 2 houses down, behind heavy velvet curtains, Eleanor Whitmore stood in the dark. 68, widowed and self-appointed guardian of the neighborhood's unwritten rules, Eleanor had a long record of calling Montgomery County Dispatch whenever someone who did not fit her narrow idea of belonging appeared on the street. She had never once knocked on Vanessa's door in the 2 years the younger woman had lived there. In Eleanor's mind, the rightful owner of 402 was a white corporate executive who traveled constantly. The dark silhouette behind the wheel of a luxury SUV pulling into a darkened driveway was all the confirmation she needed. She dialed 911, voice hushed and urgent. "Yes, police. There's a vehicle pulling into the driveway at 402 Somerset. The owner is out of town. I think someone is breaking in. Please hurry. They look dangerous." Inside the BMW, Vanessa pressed the sun visor button. The heavy mahogany garage door began its slow ascent, revealing the brightly lit, immaculate interior. She eased the SUV inside, shifted into park, and let out a long breath that shuddered with fatigue. The engine died. Silence rushed in. She reached for the leather satchel that held classified DOJ files, her federal credentials, and her laptop. The garage door started its descent, then jerked, stopped, and reversed. Someone had broken the safety sensor beam. Red and blue lights exploded across the wet concrete. A maglite beam punched through the tinted driver's side window, blinding her. A fist hammered the glass so hard she thought it might shatter inward. "Police! Shut the engine off and show me your hands! Do it now!" Vanessa froze for half a second, the primal animal reaction. Then the prosecutor took over. Adrenaline collapsed into cold, surgical clarity. She knew the statistics. She knew the case files. She knew exactly how fast a dark garage and a misunderstanding could become a press conference and a body. She raised both hands slowly, palms open, to eye level. "My engine is already off. Open the door. Step out with your hands up. If you reach for anything, you will be shot." 2 silhouettes, one at the driver's door, one flanking the passenger side, hands resting on duty belts. Vanessa unlatched the door with deliberate glacial care and pushed it open. Cold, rain-soaked air flooded the cabin. Officer Brian Jenkins, 6-year veteran, personnel file thick with excessive force complaints that had never quite stuck, stood closest, flashlight still trained on her face. His partner, Officer Cody Hayes, a rookie with 8 months on the street, mirrored the aggressive posture on the passenger side. "Step out! Keep those hands where I can see them." Vanessa placed one designer heel on the concrete, then the other, rising to her full height in a tailored charcoal Armani suit that looked nothing like the clothing of a midnight burglar. "Turn around and face the vehicle. Do not move." She did not turn. "Officers, you are on my private property. I live here. This is my vehicle, and this is my home. You have crossed the threshold of my garage without a warrant or probable cause. Lower your voices and tell me why you are trespassing." Jenkins blinked, thrown for a fraction of a second by the vocabulary and the complete absence of fear. Then the badge on his chest reasserted itself. "Listen carefully. We got a call about a burglary in progress. You pull into a dark house in a $90,000 car in this neighborhood? You don't live here. Turn around and put your hands on the roof before I put you on the concrete myself." The words hung in the air like something foul. "You don't live here." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "I am not placing my hands on my vehicle, and I am not turning around. I am the lawful owner of this residence. My name is Vanessa Carmichael. I have committed no crime. There are no articulable facts supporting reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. By ordering me to submit to a physical search inside my own home, you are violating my Fourth Amendment rights. Take your hand off your weapon, officer." Hayes shifted uncomfortably. The woman sounded like a judge. Jenkins was seeing only red. "I'm not going to tell you again." He yanked handcuffs free with a metallic clatter. "You're being detained for suspicion of burglary and grand theft auto. You're going in cuffs until we figure out who you really are. If you place those handcuffs on me, you will be initiating a false arrest and an unlawful detention under color of law. I strongly advise you to de-escalate. Ask for my identification. Do your job properly, or the legal consequences will be catastrophic." Jenkins laughed, a harsh, dismissive bark. "You're going to lecture me on the law, lady? You people always have a script. Save it for the public defender." He grabbed her left wrist and tried to twist it behind her back. Vanessa locked her elbow and stood firm. "Officer Jenkins." She read the nameplate under the garage lights. "I am going to reach into my jacket pocket. I am going to pull out my wallet. It contains my driver's license showing this exact address. It also contains something else you need to look at very carefully." "You reach into that jacket and we're going to have a serious problem," Hayes shouted, drawing his taser. The red laser dot settled on the center of Vanessa's chest. "I am moving at a fraction of normal speed," she said, never breaking eye contact with Jenkins. "My right hand is going to my left breast pocket. I am retrieving my wallet. Nothing else." Jenkins kept his grip but did not tackle her. Vanessa slid 2 fingers into the tailored jacket and withdrew a slim black leather trifold. She flipped it open. Behind the clear plastic window sat her Maryland driver's license. With her thumb, she folded the center flap downward. Pinned to the heavy leather was a solid gold badge bearing the Great Seal of the United States. Beneath it, a secure holographic identification card carried her photograph and the unmissable black lettering across the top. United States Department of Justice, Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Civil Rights Division. She held the open wallet inches from Jenkins's face. "Read it." The garage fell silent except for the rain and the static crackle of the police radio. Jenkins leaned in. His eyes moved from the gold badge to the holographic credentials. The blood drained from his face in stages. The woman he had been manhandling, the woman he had just threatened to throw onto the concrete, was one of the highest-ranking federal law enforcement officials in the country. "Department of..." His voice cracked. "Justice." "Keep reading the title. Deputy Assistant Attorney General." His hand sprang open as if the skin had burned him. He stumbled backward. Hayes still held the taser pointed at Vanessa's chest. "Jenkins, what is it? Is it a fake?" "Put the taser away, Hayes. Put it away right now." Hayes holstered the weapon, confusion flooding his young face. Vanessa slowly lowered her arms, smoothed the wrinkles Jenkins's fingers had left in her jacket, and slipped the wallet back into her pocket. The air pressure in the garage seemed to change. "Now," she said, taking one deliberate step forward. Jenkins retreated. "Let us review exactly what occurred here tonight. You bypassed the perimeter of my property without a warrant. You initiated an investigatory stop without reasonable, articulable suspicion. relying entirely on a biased assumption fed to you by a dispatcher or a neighbor. You threatened me with lethal force. You threatened me with physical violence. You unlawfully detained me. And when I attempted to inform you of my legal residency, you told me, and I quote, "You people always have a script." Jenkins opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "I want your supervisor here, now." "Ma'am, we received a 911 call about a possible B&E. I fit the description of what, Officer Jenkins? A homeowner in a business suit? A woman driving her own vehicle into her own garage? Or did I simply fit the description of someone who does not look like they belong in Somerset?" "Do not insult my intelligence. Call your watch commander immediately." Hayes reached for his radio, voice shaking. "Dispatch, 4 Adam 2. Request a supervisor to 402 Somerset Terrace. Code 4 on the suspect. It's a misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," Vanessa corrected sharply. "It is a civil rights violation under Title 18, deprivation of rights under color of law, and you, Officer Hayes, just pointed a conductive electrical weapon at a federal prosecutor." 10 minutes later, a black Ford Explorer Interceptor slid to a stop at the edge of the driveway. Sergeant Marcus Hale, 20-year veteran, salt and pepper hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, jogged up the concrete. He took one look at his 2 officers standing like scolded schoolboys, and then at the elegant, furious woman beside the BMW. Vanessa did not wait for explanations. She flipped the wallet open again. "Sergeant Hale, my name is Vanessa Carmichael. I am a Deputy Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice." Hale looked at the badge. Absolute horror washed across his face. He knew the name. Vanessa Carmichael had architected half a dozen federal consent decrees that had gutted and rebuilt corrupt departments from Baltimore to Los Angeles. What he also knew, what had not yet been released to the public, was that the DOJ had recently opened a quiet preliminary inquiry into the Montgomery County Police Department itself, focused on statistically impossible disparities in traffic stops and use of force against minorities in affluent neighborhoods. The woman standing in front of him was the exact prosecutor building that case. "Ms. Carmichael," Hale said, voice stripped of all bravado, "I am incredibly sorry. There has clearly been a massive breakdown in protocol. We received a call from a neighbor. A neighbor's racist paranoia does not override the Fourth Amendment, Sergeant. Your officers bypassed basic investigative procedures. They resorted immediately to threats of violence. Officer Jenkins physically put his hands on me while Officer Hayes held me at gunpoint with a taser." "Assaulted?" Hale spun on Jenkins. "You put your hands on her?" "I was securing the scene. She was under no legal obligation to place her hands on the car," Vanessa cut in. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. "Furthermore, Sergeant, my home is equipped with a state-of-the-art security system. Everything that happened in this garage from the moment your officers broke the sensor beam has been recorded in high-definition video and audio. It has already been uploaded to a secure cloud server." Jenkins's knees buckled. He reached for the side of the cruiser to steady himself. "Ms. Carmichael, what can we do to make this right?" Vanessa looked at the 3 men. She thought of the thousands of people who did not carry gold federal badges when police treated them like criminals in their own neighborhoods. People who ended up handcuffed, beaten, or worse, simply for existing in spaces where someone else decided they did not belong. She smiled. It was not a kind expression. "Make it right? Sergeant Hale, you do not have the authority to make this right, but I do." She climbed back into the BMW, pulled fully into the garage, and lowered the mahogany door with a final, decisive thud that sealed the careers of the 2 officers standing frozen in the rain. Inside the house, the adrenaline finally crashed. Vanessa locked the mudroom door, leaned against the heavy oak, and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes of uncontrolled trembling. She knew how easily Jenkins could have pulled the trigger. She knew how quickly a sudden movement or aggressive posture could have become the official explanation at a press conference. She had survived. The predator was awake. At 1:18 a.m., she opened her encrypted federal laptop, downloaded the 4 high-definition angles of the confrontation, and drafted an emergency email to her direct superior, Assistant Attorney General Raymond Thorne. She attached the video and wrote a clinical summary. Then she opened the covert case file she had been building for 3 months on the Montgomery County Police Department, triggered by a whistleblower tip alleging that a cluster of veteran officers systematically used excessive force against minorities, and that Internal Affairs was actively burying the complaints. She cross-referenced the badge numbers the informant had flagged. Badge 4498. Officer Brian Jenkins. He was not a random bad apple. He was the linchpin of the exact federal corruption investigation she had been quietly constructing. By putting his hands on a Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Jenkins had handed the Department of Justice the golden key to tear the entire department apart. At 7:05 a.m. the next morning, the polished oak doors of Chief Thomas Reed's office at Montgomery County Police Headquarters swung open hard. Sergeant Hale stood in the doorway clutching a manila folder, looking like he had not slept. "Chief, we have a catastrophic situation." Reed, a politician in uniform more concerned with public image than with his officers, looked up from his coffee. Hale placed a printed still frame from Hayes's body camera on the desk. Vanessa Carmichael in her tailored suit, gold DOJ badge held open inches from Jenkins's face. Last night, Jenkins and Hayes responded to a 911 call from Eleanor Whitmore in Somerset. They initiated a felony stop on a homeowner pulling into her own garage. Jenkins went hands-on. Hayes drew his taser. They didn't ask for ID until after they had already threatened lethal force. Reed frowned. "A bad stop, desk duty, an apology, maybe a small settlement if she sues." "Chief, you aren't listening. Look at the ID. The homeowner is Vanessa Carmichael, the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, the woman who just finished gutting the Baltimore PD with a federal consent decree, and she has the entire encounter on high-definition home security footage." Reed's coffee cup slipped from his hand and shattered on the hardwood, dark liquid spreading across his polished shoes. "It gets worse," Hale said quietly. "I ran the dispatch logs. The 911 caller is Eleanor Whitmore, Deputy Chief Gregory Whitmore's sister-in-law. According to the CAD notes, dispatch tried to clear the call as a low-priority suspicious vehicle because the plate matched the registered homeowner. But the call was manually overridden and upgraded to a burglary in progress by a watch commander. The room seemed to tilt. The 911 call had not been a mistake. It had been deliberately escalated by someone inside the command staff as a favor to a paranoid relative. And they had sent their most aggressive officer after a high-ranking federal prosecutor. "Get Frank Delgado on the phone," Reed ordered, voice trembling as he reached for a towel. "We need the union involved immediately. We have to bury this before she takes it to a grand jury." By 2 p.m., a tense, suffocating silence filled the 5th-floor conference room of the federal courthouse in downtown Washington. Chief Reed sat sweating through his uniform shirt. Beside him sat Frank Delgado, the aggressive president of the Montgomery County Police Union, a man who had built a career defending bad cops with technicalities, media spin, and political muscle. Across the table sat Vanessa Carmichael, immaculate in a sharp navy blazer, face an unreadable mask of professional detachment, and Assistant Attorney General Raymond Thorne, looking over reading glasses with the calm of a man about to hand down a life sentence. Delgado leaned forward, attempting his usual mix of folksy charm and subtle intimidation. "Listen, Vanessa, Ms. Carmichael, we all agree last night was a regrettable misunderstanding. Dark, raining, officers acting on dispatched information about a potential felony. High stress." Vanessa did not blink. "Frank, do not insult me. I have prosecuted cartels and corrupt politicians. Your union rhetoric will not work here." Officer Jenkins did not make a mistake. He executed a racially motivated, unconstitutional seizure and escalated to physical violence because his ego was bruised when a black woman did not immediately cower. Delgado's face flushed. "Jenkins has a family. He's a decorated officer. We're prepared to offer a formal written apology, a 2-week unpaid suspension for Jenkins, and mandatory de-escalation training for Hayes. In exchange, the DOJ declines to file formal civil rights charges, and we keep this out of the press." Thorne chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He slid a thick black binder across the table. "Mr. Delgado, you seem to be under the delusion that this is a negotiation. It is not. Open the binder, Chief." Inside were hundreds of pages of internal emails, whistleblower testimony, and dispatch logs. "This morning we subpoenaed the unedited audio of the 911 call placed by Eleanor Whitmore," Vanessa said, voice slicing the room. "Mrs. Whitmore did not report a burglary. On the unredacted tape, she specifically tells the dispatcher, 'That woman who bought the Miller house is pulling into the garage, and I don't like the look of her. Send a cruiser to scare her off.' She knew exactly who I was. She weaponized the police department to harass me. But what elevates this from a local nuisance to a federal conspiracy is what happened next." The dispatcher logged it as a non-emergency. 2 minutes later, Deputy Chief Gregory Whitmore, Eleanor's brother-in-law, logged into the computer-aided dispatch system from his home computer and manually upgraded the call to a Priority 1 felony in progress, deliberately bypassing other units and dispatching Jenkins. Delgado's jaw went slack. He looked at Reed. "Is that true, Tommy?" Reed stared at the binder in horror. "Why Jenkins?" Vanessa continued. "Why did Deputy Chief Whitmore specifically dispatch Officer Brian Jenkins to handle a favor for his sister-in-law? We looked into Jenkins's sealed internal affairs file, the one you, Mr. Delgado, fought so hard to keep hidden. Badge 4498. Officer Jenkins has 14 sustained complaints of excessive force against minority drivers in the last 3 years. And in every single instance, the reviewing officer who cleared him and buried the complaint was Deputy Chief Gregory Whitmore. They are running a protection racket." The air conditioning hummed like a jet engine in the sudden silence. Delgado slumped back, aggressive posturing shattered. He realized he was not here to negotiate a suspension. He was attending the funeral of his police department. "You didn't just assault a federal prosecutor, Chief Reed," Thorne said coldly. "Your department handed us the definitive proof of a systemic, top-down conspiracy to violate the civil rights of Montgomery County residents under color of law." Vanessa stood, buttoning her blazer. "Here are my terms. By 5 o'clock today, Officer Jenkins and Deputy Chief Whitmore will be stripped of their police powers and terminated. Tomorrow morning, they will both be indicted by a federal grand jury for deprivation of rights under color of law and obstruction of justice. Officer Hayes will resign immediately and agree to testify against them in exchange for immunity." Delgado tried to salvage something. "And the department?" Vanessa leaned over the table, planting both hands flat on the mahogany, bringing her face inches from Reed's. "As for the department, Chief, the United States Department of Justice is placing Montgomery County under a federal consent decree. We are taking over your Internal Affairs Division, your hiring protocols, and your use of force review boards. I will be auditing every single arrest your officers have made in the last 5 years. If you attempt to block me, delete a single email, or fight this in court, I will personally see to it that you face federal RICO charges." She picked up her briefcase and looked at Thorne. "We are done here." The heavy doors clicked shut, sealing Reed and Delgado in the marble hallway. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sweat poured down Reed's neck, despite the freezing air conditioning. "Tommy, listen to me," Delgado hissed, grabbing the chief's elbow and dragging him toward the elevators. "She's bluffing. The DOJ does not move this fast. She's angry, flexing muscle, but she cannot legally dismantle an entire department in 24 hours without a judge. We fight this. We go to the press. We spin it as a misunderstanding and get the mayor on the phone." Reed looked at him with hollow eyes. "Frank, did you not just read that file? They have Gregory Whitmore dead to rights. They have his IP address on the CAD override. They have 14 buried complaints on Jenkins. If we fight, she's going to indict me for RICO. Only if they have time to build the case. You call Mayor Richard Atwood right now. He owes his entire re-election to our union endorsement. Tell him to call his contacts in the Senate. We put political pressure on the Attorney General to rein in this rogue prosecutor before she destroys the county. Desperation is a powerful hallucinogen. Reed took the dose. In the back of his chauffeured cruiser, he dialed Mayor Atwood. The shrewd, image-obsessed politician listened with growing horror, then calculated that losing the police union's backing would end his career. He agreed to intervene. "Sit tight, Tommy. I'm going to make a call to Senator Bradley's office. We'll get a lid on this. Carmichael is a deputy assistant. She still has bosses. Nobody wants a federal scandal in an election year." What none of them understood was that Vanessa Carmichael did not play politics. She played the law. And she was 5 steps ahead. At 4 p.m., an hour before her deadline, Mayor Atwood sat in his City Hall office waiting for the senator's return call. Instead, his private line rang. The caller ID read, "Department of Justice, Office of the Attorney General." Mayor Atwood speaking. "Mayor Atwood, this is Raymond Thorne, Assistant Attorney General." The voice was cold, flat, entirely devoid of political warmth. "I am calling to issue a formal courtesy notification. We are aware you have been making inquiries regarding an active federal civil rights investigation being spearheaded by Deputy Assistant Carmichael. Well, Raymond, I was just trying to facilitate a smoother—" "Do not speak, Mayor." Thorne's voice cracked like a whip. "Listen carefully. If you make one more phone call, if you send one more email, or if you take one single action to interfere with or obstruct this investigation, I will personally draft an indictment charging you with federal obstruction of justice and conspiracy. Do you understand me? You will be frog-marched out of City Hall in handcuffs before the evening news." Atwood's blood ran ice cold. The phone slipped in his sweaty grip. I understand, Mr. Thorne." "Good. Have a pleasant afternoon." The line went dead. Atwood immediately dialed Reed and spoke only 3 words before hanging up for good. "You're on your own." At 5 p.m., the deadline passed. Paralyzed by fear and abandoned by his political allies, Chief Reed failed to terminate Jenkins and Whitmore. He could not bring himself to sign the paperwork, hoping the weekend would buy them time. It was the final, fatal miscalculation. At precisely 6 a.m. the following morning, the quiet, affluent streets of Bethesda were shattered by the roaring engines of 3 armored FBI Bearcat vehicles. They swarmed the gated property of Deputy Chief Gregory Whitmore. Inside his master bathroom, Whitmore stood over the toilet in silk pajamas, frantically trying to smash a cryptographic hard drive with a hammer before flushing the magnetic disks. A sympathetic dispatcher had tipped him that federal warrants were being processed. He never got the chance to finish. The heavy oak front door exploded inward under a battering ram. Flashbang grenades detonated in the grand foyer, blowing out the imported stained glass windows and filling the house with blinding light and deafening thunder. "FBI, federal agents, show me your hands." 12 heavily armed tactical agents flooded up the curved staircase, breached the master suite, and found Whitmore covered in sweat and pulverized plastic shards. Within seconds, the deputy chief of police was face down on his expensive Persian rug, hands zip-tied behind his back. Simultaneously, 20 miles away in a rundown apartment complex, Officer Brian Jenkins was awakened not by an alarm clock, but by the cold barrel of an M4 rifle pressed against his cheek. He had fallen asleep on the couch with an empty bottle of bourbon on the coffee table. He did not fight. As federal agents hauled him to his feet in undershirt and boxer shorts, Jenkins began to weep uncontrollably. The crushing weight of his destroyed life finally broke him. The E. Barrett Pretty Man, United States Courthouse in Washington, had been transformed into a fortress of media satellite trucks, flashing cameras and shouting reporters. The scandal of a racially motivated police unit that tried to terrorize a high-ranking black DOJ attorney, only to trigger a massive federal takedown of their own department, dominated every major news network on the planet. Inside Courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was suffocating. Judge Harrison Caldwell, a no-nonsense jurist with 2 decades on the federal bench and zero tolerance for institutional corruption, presided. His gavel cracked against the block and silenced the gallery. Officer Cody Hayes had resigned exactly as Vanessa demanded. Terrified by the prospect of a federal prison, the young rookie had taken a sweeping immunity deal. He sat in the witness box and detailed not only the night in Vanessa's garage, but a dozen other traffic stops where Jenkins had ordered him to falsify reports, plant evidence, or deliberately escalate encounters with minority drivers. Jenkins sat at the defense table in a bright orange jumpsuit, the aggressive bravado of the garage completely gone. He looked small, hollowed out, and violently trembling. Through his desperate attorney, he tried for a last-minute plea. Vanessa, seated with immaculate posture at the prosecution table in a tailored black suit, refused even an inch of leniency. The United States seeks the absolute maximum penalty under Title 18, Section 242, Your Honor, she stated, voice clear and resonant. Officer Jenkins did not merely violate the rights of a single citizen on a rainy October night. He acted as the militant enforcer for a systemic, localized criminal enterprise operating behind a police badge. He relied on the color of law to intimidate, assault, and falsely imprison the vulnerable residents of Montgomery County. To offer a plea deal would be an insult to the Constitution he swore to uphold. Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. Jenkins, realizing a trial would only expose him to a harsher sentence, pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge showed no mercy, sentencing the disgraced officer to 12 years in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. But the most precise justice was still to come. While the national media focused on the corrupt cops and the crumbling command staff, Vanessa had not forgotten the catalyst. On a bright, unseasonably warm Tuesday morning, Eleanor Whitmore was hosting an exclusive garden brunch for her neighborhood association. She stood on her pristine flagstone patio, holding a crystal flute of expensive mimosas, complaining to her wealthy friends about the awful noise the news helicopters were making above their previously quiet street. The clinking of crystal and polite laughter were interrupted by the heavy, rhythmic march of tactical boots. 2 stern-faced FBI special agents and a towering U.S. Marshal stepped past the catered buffet table, ignoring the gasps of the Somerset Terrace elite. "Eleanor Whitmore?" the lead agent asked loudly, ensuring every guest could hear. "Yes?" Her voice trembled as she lowered the glass. "Who are you? What is the meaning of this intrusion?" "Ma'am, you are under arrest for violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1001, making false statements to federal and local authorities, and conspiracy to deprive civil rights." He pulled heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Eleanor shrieked. The crystal flute shattered on the stone patio, orange liquid pooling around her designer flats. "This is a massive mistake. My brother-in-law is the deputy chief of police. You can't do this to me. I live in Somerset. Do you know who I am?" "Your brother-in-law is currently sitting in federal custody without bail, Mrs. Whitmore, and so are you." As she was marched out of her own backyard, sobbing hysterically in front of her country club friends, Eleanor finally understood that privilege was not an impenetrable shield against federal law. The dominoes fell with staggering speed. Deputy Chief Gregory Whitmore, faced with Hayes's damning testimony, Jenkins's guilty plea, and the miraculously decrypted hard drive the FBI forensic unit recovered from his bathroom, containing years of suppressed internal affairs complaints and horrific racist emails exchanged among the command staff, realized he was trapped. He took a blind plea. Judge Caldwell, visibly disgusted by the betrayal of public trust, sentenced the former deputy chief to 15 years in federal prison. Chief Thomas Reed, while not directly implicated in the cover-up, was utterly disgraced by his failure to lead. Under immense pressure from a terrified Mayor Atwood, who was desperately trying to avoid his own obstruction charge, and the relentless national media, Reed submitted his immediate, unconditional resignation. He lost his pension and faded into complete, shameful obscurity. 6 months after the terrifying rainy night in her garage, Vanessa Carmichael stood at a podium in the grand seal-embossed briefing room of the Department of Justice. Behind her stood Assistant Attorney General Raymond Thorne and the newly appointed federally mandated civilian monitor for the Montgomery County Police Department. Camera shutters fired like machine guns. Today, the United States Department of Justice has officially signed a comprehensive consent decree with Montgomery County, Vanessa announced, her voice clear and commanding across the live networks. This binding federal order will completely strip away the rotting infrastructure of a police department that forgot its most sacred oath to the public. We are implementing mandatory independent civilian oversight. We are completely rebuilding the Internal Affairs Division from the ground up, and we are instituting zero-tolerance use of force policies that will be aggressively, relentlessly audited by this office. A senior reporter in the front row raised his hand. Ms. Carmichael, given that you were personally the victim of this department's targeted corruption and violence, does this massive victory feel like personal revenge? The room fell into breathless silence. Vanessa looked directly at the reporter, dark eyes flashing with profound, terrifying intellect. Revenge is an emotional response meant to satisfy a bruised ego. The Department of Justice does not deal in revenge. We deal in the law. What happened in my garage was not an isolated incident. It was a glaring symptom of a deeply diseased system. I simply happened to be the one citizen they targeted who had the power, the resources, and the federal authority to surgically remove that disease. This is not personal revenge. This is exactly what justice looks like when a broken system is finally, forcefully held accountable. That evening, Vanessa drove her BMW X5 back into the quiet streets of Somerset Terrace. The sky was crystal clear, painted in brilliant oranges, pinks, and deep purples of a descending sunset. She turned onto her street, tires gliding smoothly over the pavement. There were no twitching velvet curtains at Eleanor Whitmore's dark, empty house down the block. There were no aggressive police cruisers waiting in the shadows to enforce an unwritten, prejudiced boundary. There was only the peaceful, hard-earned silence of her sanctuary. She pressed the button on her sun visor. The heavy mahogany garage door groaned and began its slow, steady ascent, revealing the bright, immaculate interior. She pulled inside, shifted into park, and turned off the engine, listening to the quiet hum of the cooling motor. As the garage door closed behind her with a heavy, secure thud, blocking out the outside world, Vanessa Carmichael picked up her leather briefcase, stepped out of the car, and walked into her home. The predator had protected her territory. The law had decisively won, and tomorrow there would be more files on her desk and more corrupt systems waiting to be dismantled.